Hello and
Well,
welcome to Cunk'd, a very unofficial podcast. I am thrilled to be joined this evening by Doctor or Professor
Doctor,
Irving Finkel.
sadly, you cannot be a professor in a museum. It's a
Ah,
real swizz, I think, but you can only be a professor in a university. And people who work in universities think rather lowly of people who work in museums, and they don't mind calling them
ooh.
doctor, but they keep this title exclusively to themselves.
Oh, I see. Oh, this makes sense now regarding certain personality types that I've encountered.
I can understand that.
Well, I am, as I've said to you in the run up to this, this is a dream come true for me. So again, thank you for this.
No, it's okay.
Um,
You haven't done anything yet. I mean, you
well,
might halfway through decide, oh, I can't. Hello, 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 hello. Oh, it seems to have got broke. Oh, it's broken down. Oh, well, never
yes.
mind. Well, we got what we could, and now we'll play something else. I mean, you've always got the broadcaster's technique. It's beautiful, I think.
Thank you very much. Thank you
Hmm.
very much. Well, look, we're here today to talk. I want to delve into several topics, and part of what we do on the Cunk'd podcast, obviously, is speak about Philomena Cunk'd and yourself having a very specific encounter with her. But I'd also like to take a chance to talk to you about anything and everything, because I know there's a number of things which are close to your heart, and
There are
there's
many
a
things
number of
actually.
topics too.
It's rather awkward because the older I get, the more things seem to be interesting all round, except mathematics and driving, and apart from that, just about everything else. So anyway,
Well, in some sense, then you share Philomena's uh, what would I describe it? Well, her lack of enthusiasm for mathematics.
yes, I think one finds myself sharing something with Philomena willy-nilly because she has such a dominant personality, which is honed into a special condition in order to dominate any forked animal that comes into her company, and you have to be extremely tough and resolute not to be swamped by it. But the one time I've done it, I had this terrific advantage over the people who were there before and came after me on that occasion because I didn't know who she was. I'd never seen her program, and the letter came, would you like to come and talk about cuneiform writing, which is what I do in the British Museum, to
Mhm.
be interviewed by this lady journalist? Well, of course, and what am I going to do? Say no? So over I go with a couple of drawings and a bit of this, a bit of that, and go in there. And instead of being in a studio with microphones or a kind of respectable thing, it was in a huge hall, I think part of the Admiralty or something, echoing thing with beams and paintings and all this kind of stuff. And in the middle of the empty floor, there were two chairs and the microphone stuff. And I'd never seen or heard of her. Anyway, so when I sat down, I was slightly on edge because despite my experience of these things and global success in speaking into microphones without wetting myself, I was slightly on edge by some kind of subconscious grasp. Anyway, when she opened with her first thrust of the rapier, I realized immediately what was going on. And I was very lucky because I don't think people always do. Because what happens is people obviously can't believe that they've heard something correctly. That's the first thing. So there's a kind of time when they have to. I somehow got it, and I decided the only way was to, with my rapier, and fight back, not defend myself, but fight back. And I found it wonderfully enjoyable to do this. And I don't know at the end if anybody won or anybody lost, but I felt I'd acquitted myself, and especially the British Museum, without disgrace. But
Mhm.
and I don't know, because I've never seen any of the programs. All I've ever seen is the bits that have come my way on YouTube because people say, "I see you're on," and I've had a look. And actually, I would like to have another go at her because I think next time, if you are really armed and defended, whatever the subject was, I think you could probably have quite a lot of fun the other way round. But
I
anyway, she's a very interesting force in the world, in my opinion, because I mean everybody says she's unique, she gets away with things that nobody doesn't get away with, she's this, she's that. But there's some
She's
phenomenal.
also very triggering, isn't she? My mother in particular. It's a quite a polarizing reaction to her because many
Yes.
people get very upset with her because I think they deem her as being willfully ignorant and wasting time and resource.
Well, I think so. It's a bit like Marmite in the extremes of reaction and in the love and hate situation. And I think underneath you can say this and that. I think she has a highly professional sense of integrity. So she's created something which is without parallel, and she's got it down to an instinctive, highly professional actress's kind of immersion in the personality.
Hmm.
But actually, at the same time, there is always a rather serious satirical, an unanswerable line of inquiry, which in fact is often unanswerable. And questions which are not answerable are seldom to be encountered.
Hmm.
You know, in archaeology, people say, what did the Vikings eat for breakfast? And nobody knows. But that's an unanswerable question. But she turns things upside down in such a way that people are sometimes completely stumped for a rational explanation. I mean, she asked somebody whether they built the pyramids from the top down or the
Yeah,
bottom up, I mean, which is the sort of question that a clever 3-year-old might think of, and
yeah.
maybe Einstein after a long evening. But
Uh,
um,
I believe she asked.
guy was hopeless. The guy was hopeless. I mean, I would have said, "Oh, we know all about it now." They did. That was the old-fashioned. What they did is they started in the middle,
Yeah,
and some went. So that would have been a.
there
She
you
wouldn't have
go.
been able to come back, and that's the essence of the whole offensive, I think.
100%. No, I spoke to, as we discussed earlier, Professor Rupert Sheldrake the other day, and he was, I think rightly so, a little bit put out that only about 7 to 8 seconds actually made it to air, but she got him quite um, severely with is there. She started with "Is there a God?"
Yes.
and he came in straight back with "Yes," and then she replied with, "Does God have a brother called Simon?" And he said no, and she said, "Well, how do you know? Because they haven't proven that so far." And just there is something about
Hmm.
there's something about the interactions where, and I think it's to do. We've discussed it. It's to do with the tension that's
There's something
created.
else. It's what when I was a student, what people used to call Zen, because they used to read trendy paperbacks about monks in Japan, and there was
Yes.
a sort of
What's the
Zen
sound of
way of thinking. And
what's
the
the sound
highest
of one hand
philosophical
clapping?
point, yeah, the sound of one hand clapping. And some of her intellectual framework is on that approach. She's
Mm.
aligned to that, because um, it stumps people, even people who are pretty fluent. And I mean, it would be interesting to see if she got a really top-rate barrister in the chair,
Mm.
because they have all the qualities to combat her on her own level and more. I don't know whether they've ever done that, but it would be quite interesting to do that and then ask absolutely fatuous questions about the law, which probably is 100 years since they ever thought about them. You know,
Yeah.
that kind of.
There's a lot. I think there's a lot of very fertile ground to be ploughed there.
I think.
When you spoke with Philomena, obviously you covered your area of expertise. Kind of, am I pronouncing this right? Cuneiform, is that correct?
Yes, yes, yes.
Cuneiform, which is the earliest form of human writing, I believe, which went on to become the foundations for Sumerian. Is that
Yes,
correct?
yes.
Yeah,
It's the earliest writing that we know of from archaeology, but I'm always reluctant to say it's the earliest that ever was because we just
sure.
don't know. But I think probably there were things earlier. But yes, that's what it is. Mm.
And her, it's as you say, the couple of clips of yourself, which probably the ones that I've sent to you via YouTube, actually probably have come from my account, probably personally.
Oh, I see.
Um, yeah, most likely because I have a bit of an obsession slash fascination, um, and that's what this podcast has been about, and having these conversations really, and it's great to hear you speak about why that's really the crux of it is why is it that what is so interesting, what is so engaging about her style of comedy and questions?
Well, I think she's invented a kind of approach in a way. She's not a satirist.
No.
She's a sort of sub-satirist. Because the psychological consequences, if she asks a disingenuous, innocent question, which may or may not be regarded as sensible by anybody else, but nevertheless is a sincerely put question, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
the expert, in any case, should be able to wipe the floor with her in such a way that she would be mortified, and
Yeah.
nobody does.
No.
So this means she has some kind of integrity which surpasses the theatricality. She has a kind of role. And I could imagine that she could easily, as it were, at some point, leave this entirely and invent some other thing which had the same kind of angular approach to the truth and what people always think they know and how do they know it, which is a very important adult matter. And
Mhm.
it may be that the patience of the watching public after a while finds that this has run its course. I don't know, because it's always very interesting, but it might be that. But I think what she has inside her could easily evolve into something parallel but not imitative, where she had a different character, but the quirkiness
Yeah.
of of asking the undermining question, which makes a mockery of most of scientific structure, is a really wonderful thing. I
It
mean,
truly is. And just going back to something you touched on there, the nature of truth, in terms of the audiences, and when I was speaking to Professor Sheldrake, he was quite surprised to hear that in terms of audience and statistics, that American audiences, especially on the clips that I share, take up about 2/3
oh,
of the overall population. Do you think perhaps maybe that has something to do with the orange one in charge, and perhaps a loosening of perhaps the that culture's grip on what is true and the nature of truth?
well, uh, it's a big question. One of the points is that um, I don't know how to put it. Yes, I think this is it. I think she's not embarrassed about looking stupid,
Yeah.
because she knows she's in an arena where she is eventually going to look stupid many, many times.
Mm.
And in England, um, as if you can generalize about the English psyche, people do not like to experience that feeling that they look stupid. They don't. There are inhibitions in. I mean, you can't talk about the English character, but in living in this country, one feels very commonly that people don't want to be made fools of. They don't like it. They really find it makes them very uncomfortable and very angry. Whereas I think perhaps in the States, the thing which bottles that down might have much more freedom about it. The people don't
Yeah.
care, and if people laugh at you, then it's not always necessarily full of ghastly satire, but they're laughing with you to a certain extent. And if you cheer them up and they feel better and they laugh at you, even if you're wrong, well, that's not such a terrible thing. So there's probably a definable, laboratory testable idea of the difference in audiences in that respect. Because I think most English people, I mean, of course, the world changes all the time, and you can't make generalizations about
No.
English behavior like one could when I was a kid, for example, where it was much clearer, that sort of thing. People are, or always have been, rather inhibited. And people who are not in the public eye generally, and insecure of their education, insecure of their knowledge base, not sure about their spelling, all that, there are many things that can make people very embarrassed.
Hmm.
And and also, when you go to school in England, they taught you that if you made a spelling mistake, it was a really terrible thing and a grammatical mistake. So people came out of school without any ease about writing their own language in case they screwed up. And this was a kind of pivotal issue in the psychology of bringing people up, bringing up children, so that they don't screw up. They don't screw up, like that, which is neither here nor there. I mean, the best illustration of this is when I was at school, we had a very wonderful. Are you still there?
Oh, I am sorry. Apologies.
That's right.
There-
We had it with a wonderful Scottish French teacher like Miss Jean Brodie. She was a bit like that, and she taught us French. And I did A-level French, and I really liked it. But all the way through the school, this was the issue. That the whole idea of this in this school, you have to learn to speak French like a Frenchman, so that when you go there, they think that you live there, and they're impressed with your language, and it never crosses their mind for a moment that you're a foreigner. Okay. So you
Mhm.
must never make mistakes. You have to learn everything like that. So you're a perfect little robot. Well, the thing is this: I've never met any English person who can speak flawless French. It's very rare unless you have a parent who speaks French.
Yes.
Otherwise, it's impossible, really, even for a brilliant linguist. And the history of linguistic investigation is always, oh, people say perfect Arabic, they speak perfect Swedish. It's nothing of the kind. It's impossible
Hmm.
unless you have the freak circumstance of twin parents. So this is the thing that kids, instead of being taught this, if you go to France and you're really awkward and you go in a shop and you want to buy a bar of chocolate and you try and do it in French, The school approach was that they'll say to you, I'm not going to serve you. You can't even speak our language. Get off the premises.
Mm.
Somebody will probably embrace the person because they're trying to say
They're trying.
something in their language. It's just the opposite. They love it. Like English people love French accents in the cinema. It's the same thing as that. It's nothing to do with being right or wrong. And so instead of teaching kids that you learn enough French, you can get by and you can read a comic and then you can read a little novel and you can watch television programs and you understand most of it and this and this and this. So you have a tool in your head when you go into the world. And if you have to go and live in France for a year, then by the end of it, you'll be fluent. But no one's going to laugh at you for making a mistake. But the whole system was predicated on the illusion that perfection was either available or even necessary.
Yes.
So this, I think, is connected with something to do with her identity. It's modeled on this issue of shame for not doing things right, shame for not explaining, shame for this. She is an exploitation of this inherited fear that you're going to be made a fool of. And I don't mind being made a fool of in the least bit. And I think lots of people there, if you said before they came in, look, we'll pay you 100 quid for doing this, but you do realize that she's going to make a fool of you in front of the nation. Most people wouldn't go anywhere near it.
True.
So it's
True.
connected to my mind.
Absolutely. I think it's a superpower in many ways, isn't it? I think, and the English or the British, I think, if you look back through the comedy legends and heroes and how we revere celebrities, and I'd like to talk to you about that actually in a bit more depth in terms of the difference between perhaps the older generations where perhaps celebrity or those iconic figures of the past came from either military or, I mean, great people were great people who made things or built things or went someplace and discovered something new. Very, very different now, I think, to the modern day interpretation of what celebrity is.
Yeah,
And I think, just to go back to that, in terms of how we treat and revere actors and comedians and people of the arts in that respect, I think something is linked there to, I think, just naturally being able to play the fool is something that people really revere and people are impressed by.
I think so. The question of who we regard as celebrity, it's the underpinning of the whole idea that people ought to be celebrated if they merit it. But like many things in the world, the two are there's a disjunct between them. So people become celebrities in the very modern world for the most fatuous reasons possible of non-achievement, which not only shouldn't be celebrated, it should never be mentioned in public. So the focus has gone out of what celebrity is. I mean, I would say that the people who make a real contribution to the world should be celebrated. And if that was the rule of thumb, you couldn't go far wrong.
Mm,
And when you come to the question of inventing things, this of course is a muddy area
mm.
because one could make a perfectly reasonable case for the idea that the people who are celebrated for discovery are seldom the people who made the discovery.
Yes, the Wozniak Jobs dilemma.
Yeah,
And so many cases, yes, absolutely. And I
uh,
think I mean, speaking of, we've already touched on him, but Donald Trump is kind of a very singular case in point, really, in terms of how far one can rise with particularly not just zero talent whatsoever, but so many qualities which should be admonished. And well,
well, I suppose from the point of view of history, often you get established truth by comparing the extremes at one end and the other in order to establish the median point, which is the way forward. And I suppose from the point of view of history, Trump has been invented and given power in order to be one end of the spectrum,
the arse end.
whatever you like to call it. And there are people in the world, Attenborough, for example, I would say might be
Yes.
a very good candidate at the other end of the spectrum. And if we're thinking about redesigning human beings for the best possible way, the first thing we would do is draw in these points till we get to the middle and then go from there. So I find it completely unintelligible that that person was put in charge of a country like America. I would think that if you had all the phone books in America in a row and you went through them with your fingertip, one by one by one by one, every single name would be better qualified to be king of.
I thank you so much. I would love to speak a little bit more now, if we can, just a little bit about your background and how. Because actually, I should have. You spoke at the start about my broadcasting style, a little bit sporadic. I should have started by asking you to maybe introduce yourself, perhaps for those who aren't familiar with you, and what your level, what your area of expertise is.
Well, my name is Irving Finkel. That's one thing, and I'm a curator in the British Museum. And I've been there since 1979, and I wanted to work in the British Museum from the age of about 8, and I still want to work in the British Museum, and my plan is to keep working in the British Museum until some ghastly thing intervenes, like expiry or the roof collapsing on me. So I'm a very happy individual in the world because I wanted a job in a very esoteric field in the one building in the world where it was possible, and I did both things because I went to university to learn a dead and ancient language, which was difficult, not Latin and Greek because everybody can read those. And I thought about Egyptian, but it ended up that I learned to read cuneiform writing from ancient Iraq, which there are two basic languages, the Sumerian language and the Babylonian language, and they're all written on these clay tablets in this funny wiggly script, which everybody can't tell which way up it goes. And they wrote on clay, which was a jolly good idea because most of the things they ever wrote are still in the ground. So we have in the BM, for historical reasons, on impeccable moral grounds, about 130,000 pieces of clay with writing on that cover 3 millennia of time from the beginning of the script until the 1st century AD. And the most marvelous stuff survives on these things: literature, poetry, letters, business documents, royal inscriptions, prayers, medicine, magic, all the gamut of things written on these tablets, which, unless something terrible happens, survive forever. So
Fabulous.
I went to university. I had the most unusual experience at university. I was my professor's only student. He wasn't very keen at taking me on, but he had to. So I
This
did.
was William Lambert. Is that
Wilfrid Lambert, yes, he was like Sherlock Holmes. He was a living, nearly as good as the one on the television versions of Holmes. He would have been very good in the role. He even looked like the drawing. He was very austere and very sarcastic and very dominating. And I had him as my own teacher without anybody else for most of the time, even until I got my PhD. So I grew up in it was like being jetted off to the moon without any water and have to
Yeah,
build a shelter and survive until the rocket came. So it was like that, very intense. And I worked like the devil at university, and then wrote my PhD. And all my friends, normal people, were doing English or German or geography. And when you had an English lecture, there were 378 other students in the auditorium, and most of them, I mean, they didn't have mobiles in those days. God knows what the students did all the time because they didn't have mobiles. Now I think about it. But I suppose they sat in the queues writing notes and flicking them at the girls and that kind of stuff. Then nobody ever said, "And what do you think, Mr. So-and-so?" to any of them. They were unpersecuted and they swanned through it. It was like being at school. I was in the hot seat. If I hadn't done my homework, there was no hiding anywhere.
no,
But I had the most exacting, and then I got the job I had a job in Chicago for 3 years,
yeah.
which was something else marvelous, in the Oriental Institute. And then I got the job in the BM, and I've been there ever since. And I mean, if things go the way they seem to go in the planet, I think I might just be there till the end of time. I think that's probably the simplest solution, really, all round. But the collection is unspeakably marvelous, and I'm a ferocious defender of the museum against all the Philistine crap that people talk about it and the feces that they try and throw at it and the way they try to.
Is a lot of that based around repatriation, or is that different?
Well, I thought we weren't going to talk about this. I think the thing is, the accusation is that the British Museum was the strong arm of the hated imperial empire, and wherever we went, we stole everything from innocent natives and took it home. And that is, that's the sort of question, come to think of it, that lady we were talking about before, it's exactly the kind of question she would ask a curator, because it's a pretty difficult thing in a single sentence to demolish it. That's her sort of point, is
Mm.
that, because each part of it is not really true,
Mm.
and the whole of it is 100% misleading. But
Yeah.
all I want to say is that in the world in which we live, which is a scandalous disgrace for human achievement,
Mm.
the British Museum is a lighthouse in unbelievable darkness,
Yeah.
and it should never be tampered with, because it's designed for grandchildren's, not they've never been born and never even thought about, for the long-term future,
Mm-hmm.
as a monument of human achievement. And there isn't another one in the world. So
And to be cherished and treasured.
cherish and not allow people to mutter and mutter and mutter, because I've been there such a long time, and I know that the default position in Britain is that the population always used to, and I bet they really still do, are proud of the British Museum. It's a national wonder. And people now, they're embarrassed, and then they're made to say this, and then they say this, and then they think there's all meddlesome journalists and meddlesome politicians. And it's nothing to do with politics.
No.
It's to do with curators. That's my opinion.
Well, I wanted to talk to you more about that in terms of collecting itself, the phenomenon of collecting.
It's an interesting thing. I don't like to keep starting sentences by saying when I was a boy, but when I was at school, collecting was a normative activity for boys and girls. It was a kind of thing that you did, and there was a range of things that you collected, and it might be stamps, coins, cards, tools, bits
Football
and pieces,
stickers.
football stickers, all those sorts of things, which and cigarette cards from your grandfather, and all those things that were available and collectible, and sometimes made the most marvelous thing, which is sets, because once you've got a set, that's a major achievement, like Nelson's column, and everyone was always trying to do that. And people, this is my point about it. In those days, when people collected things, they could never buy them.
Mm.
So you got them from an uncle. You found one somewhere in a rubbish bin, or somebody, your uncle gave you one, or you swapped something. Or there's no money, and you couldn't go to a shop. Now, the things that they make now, which are cards, superficially the same kind of thing, the designs on sets of this, sets of that, sets of that. You buy them either with, I suppose, bubblegum or whatever it is nowadays, or you buy them just as the cards. And so it becomes a matter of the child spending and spending money in order to accumulate them. And there's a kind of venomous wickedness about this, because it has taken away the innocent pleasure of real collecting, which is to look forever for something that you want to find, and then finally finding it, which is a very deep source of gratification and excitement, and which never really goes away. But if all you have to do is go to the newsagent and buy a packet, that completely denigrates its significance. But on top of that, these people produce things where they tell you that this number and this number and this number are rare, and they print them. Number 9, this is rare, things like that. Whereas rarity is a function of nature.
Mm-hmm.
And the forces of destruction and accident and fortuity. It is not a created quality. So the whole thing, in my opinion, is perverted, utterly perverted. And none of my kids collect anything, whereas I've been collecting things since I could walk. And it's an interesting thing. The horizon is different, and it was a free market, and it was non-commercial. And go through life, the longer you can go through life without even realizing that things cost and are worth money, the better off you are. But nowadays, everybody's wise to everything, once they've got their little machine and everything.
Completely. I think that's the reason there was a TV series over the last few years on BBC called The Detectorists. I don't know if you ever watched it.
What, digging things up in the ground?
Exactly, yeah. It was a kind of a comedy drama, very light-hearted. Toby Jones and Mackenzie Crook, but it really struck a chord with people of all generations, because, as you say, it wasn't. They did such a beautiful job of articulating, as you were saying, that perhaps almost lost sense of collecting things with your hands, digging in the dirt, finding something, and then that just wasn't it. It wasn't just that initial hit of dopamine because, oh, I found something. It was then the other processes of finding out what it is, where it came from, what
Yeah,
other things are connected to it.
yes, that is exactly the point. And there's a disappearance now of what used to be called junk shops and antique shops and all the things in between. And originally, if you had a collector's eye and you liked old this or old that, you're bound to find something. Because there was so much stuff around and nobody cared about it. It didn't cost anything, 5 pence or something like this. And you could collect things quite seriously and make a collection, and you knew other people. So this is a source of pleasure. But the thing is, it was independent of manipulation by outside forces. So I think collecting now is a sort of dirty word. And people say, what do you do? And you say, well, I'm a collector. They move away from you at a dinner party because they probably think you collect stolen things and you have things stolen and you keep them in your room and no one can see them.
You're a hoarder.
All that. Yeah, you can never throw anything away and you have piles of newspapers. I don't know what. The whole collecting thing is smeared over with a bad odor. And I think it's a pity because serious collecting and intellectual collecting has the consequence of producing a great deal of knowledge. And people who spend their lives collecting this or that know more about things than anybody else does. And they make a collection which has a message for the future in lots of different ways and needs to be rescued. And the whole thing used to be, and still can be, a very worthwhile proposition. But I don't know. You hardly hear the word collector. I mean, I once had an idea about 10 years ago of writing a book for children about collecting, and especially with a cartoonist or something, a proper fat book, the sort of encyclopedic book that when you have flu, you lie in bed and read it with pleasure because the drawings are good and the words are good, that sort of book, about collecting. And it would cover, among other things, what's a good idea to collect and why and what you can do with it, and what you shouldn't collect, like birds' eggs and I don't know what, all those things that everybody frowns on, and why it's not a good idea, and the distinction between, so that you would have a kind of path. If you had that propensity, you were interested, you could do things and hold your head up and not be ridiculed or despised. But I think the day of the collector has gone. And of course, for the BM, collectors of an intellectually able, usually affluent and determined nature are responsible for good parts of our collection because they gave to the nation the fruits of their own lifetime collecting. Without that, we would be also much diminished.
I agree. I think that leads us perfectly on to, speaking of collections, the Great Diary Project, which
the Great Diary Project.
It just for anyone who hasn't heard of it, could you just give us an overview and tell us how it started?
Yes, I'm very proud of the Great Diary Project because it was my idea, and it's come into being with a lot of help from a lady called Polly North and the guy at the Institute of Bishopsgate Institute, Stefan, who was in charge of the archive, and we got the thing from an idea into reality. And people often in life say, somebody ought to this, somebody ought to that, somebody ought to run the railways, that kind of. There's a whole load of someones hanging about in purgatory waiting for a job, of course. Anyway, I discovered the interesting phenomenon, which I didn't suspect, that in houses, in families, where you have a diarist, say of a grandmother or grandfather type, and the grandfather or grandmother dies, the minute they do, their diary is in peril. Because for a lot of reasons, the people who inherit the stuff, or people on whom the stuff is dumped, which is more of a way of looking at it, can't wait to get rid of it. And they put it in a skip or they put it on the bonfire and they get rid of it. And there's a kind of remorseless passage. You might have a person who writes a diary every day for 73 years, expires, and a month later it's all ash. This is a criminal and terrible, terrible thing. So I had this idea of starting a rescue project. It's really a rescue project to articulate the reasons why diaries should always be rescued for the future, and where they should go and what should be done with them. And after I'd been on the radio and made a lot of noise about it, I met these other two, and Stefan agreed to take in Bishopsgate Institute. He gave us a kind of big room for storage. You get a lot of diaries in a room. It's amazing. And we advertised this, that we would take diaries of any kind, at any period, any language, either gender, any part of the world, ink, pencil, anything you can see, anything vaguely like a diary, we want it. And we will look after it forever and ever, and we will keep it as a voice of the human race, because there are many people in the world who never write books. Stands to reason, and lots of people in the old days never did any broadcasting or any of this kind of thing. So when they die, they have their genetic inheritance, and that's to say their children, but nothing else to show they ever really existed. And lots of people like that die with a diary of greater or lesser length as a fruit of their intellectual processes, their life's experiences in the English language. So I thought to myself, this is utter gold dust. Because historians, maybe it's unfair to say this now, but for a long time this was true, historians as a species did not care a fig about normal persons. It's the same situation that politicians today don't care a fig about normal persons either. It is the same principle. And the thing is that the diaries kept by normal persons, 1 volume, 20 volumes, or 70 volumes, whatever it might be, are in fact a testimony of unbelievable purity and importance. And I don't mean precious bodily fluids like in that form. I'm not daft. What I mean is that most people who write a diary write it for themselves and nobody else. And this is very important, because very often husbands and wives do not read one another's diaries, and sometimes don't even know about it. And when people write a diary, on the whole, nobody was supposed to read it. That was the rule. I don't know, in the modern world, God knows what happens. Perhaps they have orgies when they read them out. In principle, a diary was for the diarist, which had many interesting reflexes, one of which is that nobody cared about grammar and nobody cared about spelling. They didn't care about anything, and they did little balloons and little this and that, because no one was over their shoulder saying, that's not how you spell believe. See me after class. It's a private thing. It's a private thing. But more important is this, that when people write a diary for their own eyes only and nobody else's, they tell the truth. At least they tell the truth as they understand it, which is not quite the same thing. The testimony is only in the case of raving lunatics, manipulative or full of lies, because there's no point, there's no market. So on the whole, you get a kind of homespun, comfortable level of truth, which is not mathematically definable and not something in a courtroom on a Bible, but it's pretty damn reliable.
And so, valuable.
Yeah, and invaluable.
Compared
because
to
everything that's there has this quality.
Compared to all of the because of Netflix and Amazon and all of these streaming services, there's been this huge tidal wave of celebrities who've been creating their own documentaries about themselves.
Yeah, well, that's
and if you put that, and again, talking of two ends of the spectrum, on one hand you have Granny's diaries from the 1920s, and then I don't know, David Beckham, who is giving you a 5-hour documentary series in which, and I have to be honest, it's just whitewashing and rewriting his own history for his own brand.
Yeah. And they're hagiographies.
Yes,
that's the word for those things. You know, there was a famous actress, who was it? Who said, was it Mae West, who said, "Look after your diaries, and one day they'll look after you."
Very good, excellent.
Politicians publish their diaries. The only stipulation in the collection at Bishopsgate is we will never take a politician's diary.
Excellent.
It's written into the statutes. But it's such a fascinating thing, because we have things from the 18th, 19th, 20th and 21st centuries already, and it's about 20,000 diaries. I'm not sure of the exact number. It's very substantial already, and it's fascinating. And I'm crazy about it, because there are places that have diaries, or they keep this and they keep that, but there's no place that has a dedicated scheme to rescue them as a genre for the future. And the primary task was to stop destruction. But actually, as a matter of fact, because it's in Bishopsgate Library, people come and they consult them, because Polly had this fantastic thing where on the website there's a thing where a new diary comes in. She writes a few lines, this date to this date,
Mhm.
big family, first car, flood in the basement, or 10 things like that, and the place and the name, and then people come to look at them, and sometimes it's the family, so it's a very enlightened and wonderful matter, and it should just go on and on until diaries stop. But of course they will,
Yes.
because most people can't write very well anymore. You give them a fountain pen, they don't know what it is.
Mhm.
They won't write in a pencil, and all they can do is type things on a keyboard where it will correct for you, so you
Mhm.
don't even have to think. So this is disgusting to me.
Mhm.
But the thing is, you
What
cannot
you
write a diary on a computer.
Well, I was about to say, even worse then is that perhaps the modern day equivalent or view of a diary is someone's own Twitter account or TikTok.
Or blogs. Yeah.
Mm.
Yes, I had an idea about blogs. It's an abbreviation for bloody load of old guff.
Do you have Do you have a favorite diary, or one that stands out since you started the project?
Yes, I do. It's a 5-year diary from about 1848 onwards, and it was written by a clergyman in Gloucestershire,
Hmm.
and it's a beautiful thing. And the whole of the diary is written in code.
Oh wow!
And because I read these scripts and things, I thought,
Got
that's got this down. And actually, I had a very great deal of trouble with it. And eventually, right in the middle, in pencil, there was a few words written in plain with the code letters underneath. And I don't know who did that or why. It was a long, long time ago. So that gave me about 7 letters.
uh-huh.
And then from there, the task was simple. But I was actually up and down all sorts of false alleys. Anyway, now I can read it fluently. And it's a clergyman, and it's fantastic because, well, there are many things about it, but one of them is it's clear that he wrote the code with great fluency. So I suspect he went to Trinity College Dublin to
Hmm.
study theology, and I imagine there was a group of chaps there, or maybe at school, who concocted this code, and he must have used it a lot.
Yeah.
So when he grew up and started his own life, he used it for these diaries. And the interesting thing is, there's hardly anything in the diaries that would merit a code.
Right.
Not really. There's a lot of things about what things cost, this, that, and the other. There are some things, but not. I mean, I haven't read it all. In fact, it's such a long job. But so far, there's nothing which would merit the code, like adultery, lust, sin, burglary, starting fires, or all the other sins that you might crop your mind. But
Mhm.
so, but in the diary, he sometimes refers to his journal. So I think he had 2 things. Now, I found this little book. I found it in a skip,
Wow.
and I was walking along, and I always look in skips, and there was a whole load of about 12 diaries and a lot of parchment papers and this, that, and the other. And I stood there looking over looking over at it, and wondering what to do. And the door opened, and this bloke stood on the doorstep, and he said, he didn't say anything. He just looked at me like that, and he said, "You can have it if you want." At the door. That was that. So I leaned over and I extricated all the diaries. I didn't want the other stuff at all.
No.
And I climbed back out of the skip, got back onto the boat, and ran for my life because I thought he might be insane. But anyway,
Yeah.
the thing was, this diary was on its own, and it was going to be skipped. It would have been in an infill. And probably, it was the fortuitous thing that I was there. But it's full of such amazing stuff. And I need a lot of time to finish it. But I've got a lot of, diaries. The thing is about it, I'm really not obsessed with it, but I'm pretty concerned, because if you do this sort of work and you rescue them, it's invidious to think this is my favorite, this is my next favorite, these are my, because they're all interesting to me.
Hmm.
They're all interesting. And diaries which they got up, had breakfast, went to work, came home, watched television, and went to bed, which quite often or the whole entry for a diary,
Sure.
quite often.
Well, I remember Louis XVI's diaries when he was quite a prolific diarist, but he had a hunting diary. And that's all he did was record. So even on the day that the Bastille was stormed, or when I think it was the fishwives
That's marvelous.
came to get
That's
it,
marvelous.
he had written
These
down
strikes.
nothing
Yeah,
nothing
yeah.
to report.
Oh,
Nothing
good.
happened.
And
But
you go
obviously, I
hunting.
mean, the French Revolution was happening. But in terms of his diary, the only entry was it was only specific to hunting.
Well, I have an idea that we're often given diaries just before the end of the year as a present. So
Yeah,
when they wake up on January the 1st, they probably say, "Mom, what am I supposed to write about?" Probably a million times they had this conversation. And what the parent would always say, "We'll write about what happens in your day." So that's why people say "got up" as the first line. It's a kind of cause and effect situation.
right.
And to match your story, online, you can see the Diaries of Queen Victoria, which have now been edited if you subscribe, and they've been bowdlerized or shortened by Princess Beatrice, who obviously kept anything tricky
Sure.
out of it. But the page that they put on screen in order to seduce you into subscribing is the day of her marriage. And up in the corner, there's a picture of her in her wedding gown, and down at the bottom, there's a drawing of her with Prince Charming. And it's a delightful thing. And the whole thing is written in manuscript all the way down to the bottom. And the first line is got up, got dressed, had breakfast on the day she married her husband. So this suddenly means this is a serious matter.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a serious matter because if you're a non-human and you look at all these things, you think these things. What I tell you what, when you write your diary, if you don't get up, put that down. Otherwise, we know you got
We
up.
know you
We
got up.
know
Of
you
course
have.
you woke up, and
Yeah,
we probably assume you had breakfast.
yeah.
Skip to the good bit, please.
Skip to the good bit. So
Speaking of
if you
non-humans,
turn it on its head, it's
yeah,
interesting.
how often do you get asked about non-humans and ancient civilizations? I think you know what with this.
Yes, quite a lot.
I
Um,
bet.
Actually, once somebody sent me, I've forgotten his name. He was a fucking lunatic. And he had a nephew who was even worse. And he had a really cut voice, very Eton and Cambridge sort of accent, very
No.
smart. And his nephew had written a book about the Anunnaki and how all the knowledge in the world came from outer space. And he sent me this book. And I was a young and wet behind the ears curator then. And this fellow rang me about 107 times to ask me if I would write something about the book that they could put on the cover at the back. So in the end, after a considerable amount of thought, I wrote something. The exact word I can't remember. It was the difference between. I said, "This is not something I believe,"
Uh-huh.
and
Uh-huh.
when it was printed, they left out the word "not."
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
Wow.
after that, people who are insane, when you write letters from the British Museum, you have to be very careful and very polite. I've never been rude to anybody in a letter, but there are devices. One of them is this: "Dear sir, thank you very much for your letter. I shall lose no time in reading it."
Brilliant. Brilliant. That's very Pratchett, I fear.
It's lovely. Yeah, in fact, this is a sort of, I've used it myself on many an occasion because it's unexceptionable and people don't even bother to write. They can't do anything, see? And they don't really feel angry. It's just, it's brilliant. And there are other things like
Nice.
that. Mm.
And just wanted to ask you as well, just to move. I didn't want to. I honestly, I didn't want to have a conversation with you about ancient aliens because it would just. I just don't think it's a great use of your time. However, and in this modern day and age,
Oh
it
yeah,
would
people ask me all the time.
Oh, I bet they do.
Uh,
And
they do.
it could be
Yes.
very easy, really, to ask you all about the Anankai and gold and all of this stuff. And I could put it out online and it would get millions and millions of views. But what I'd actually rather ask you about is if you've ever tried to write a love letter in cuneiform.
Well, that's a very interesting and novel question. There are one or two love letters in cuneiform.
Fabulous.
Uh, they're one of them is a bit like that thing when Tom Lehrer says he had a letter. You know Tom Lehrer.
I don't. Sorry.
What?
I know.
Write it down. Tomlehrer. He's a Harvard American mathematician who invented piano and satirical songs. You don't know the song about Werner von Braun?
I don't. I'm afraid.
Man whose allegiance. Oh gosh.
Homework.
The man whose allegiance was ruled by expedience. You just have to listen to Tom Lehrer. There's a concert online in Scandinavia with Tom Lehrer at the piano. He's a wizard pianist, a real good, and it's just your life will be different.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, he talks about a letter saying, I love you and I cannot live without you. Marry me or I will kill myself. And he took another look at the envelope and it said occupant. So I always thought that was a kind of, yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I could write a love letter. I could write sonnets in the Caden, but the only thing is, who would they be for? Who would they be for? I mean, my dear wife lives her life without any knowledge of cuneiform, as far as I can tell, and that seems to me a perfect state which should never be tampered with, because she's a real person in the real world, and God knows what would happen if, I don't know, if you had a husband and wife who both read cuneiform, it would be the end of everything. But so I like poetry, I like love poetry, and but I wouldn't be an awful lot of point in writing it in cuneiform, because the whole point about writing love poetry is that the person comes round in the middle of the night in a see-through raincoat and rings on the doorbell. I mean, otherwise, what's the point?
What? Absolutely. I mean, from my limited understanding, I mean, I listened to something recently regarding cuneiform, and it was about how the first writing was really based on accountancy, much more than poetry.
Based on accountancy. The stimulus for writing
Mm.
was probably a very complex urban society with wages and administration, where recording became necessary. So early on, they developed a number system, and they developed simple signs for writing the important words. And it's possible that the stimulus right at the beginning was what you would call proto-accountancy. The fact is that the earliest texts that we have are of that type, but it may not be that that was the only reason for it. It doesn't really matter. I mean, I think, I don't know whether the developing the point at large that the curse of the inland revenue has been with us since the beginning of recording history is a beneficial or otherwise state of affairs. But the thing is, once the writing started off with very basic pictures, picturing ideas, and then people thought you can use these signs to write sounds.
Mm-hmm.
And when they did that, then they moved away from simple lists of barley and numbers to be able to write words. And when they could write words, then you had language, literature, grammar. I mean, you had the language already, but you had literature, and you had recording of ideas and history, and everything came in a great rush, probably right from the beginning. So it might be that someone, you see, that probably there was an abacus system in existence before clay tablets. Probably there was, because there's a sign that looks a little bit like an abacus that might be a pictograph of an abacus. And of course, if you're deft, you can do all sorts of things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But we have, like always with archaeology, we have a whole lump of stuff in a very small locus and a whole lump of stuff over there and bit there. And one always tries to make a continuum where everything fits into a continuum. But in fact, ideas and experience don't come in a linear continuum.
No.
There's always false starts and then around a corner and all that. So it's what we have at the moment makes it probable, but that's all, that the people who first started to think of the idea of making signs that somebody else could understand were working in about 3,500. And the first signs were the sort of things that children draw, like a foot for running and, that kind of, and eventually they moved beyond that to the much more sophisticated thing that you could do these little drawings and many others to write sounds, syllables. And that is what opened up writing, which is the giant leap for mankind.
Yeah.
With all these things, people think, oh, it was invented once and spread around the world, or everybody invented it for themselves, or whatever it might be. But
what you're saying is it is bigger than rap, metal, or acid jazz.
Well, you have to go, whatever it was. Yes, yes. Yeah, exactly. It is a little bigger than that, I think. It's true. It's a funny thing. But it is so interesting. And the sad thing about all this, I mean, we have this a royal library, and we have literature, we have Gilgamesh, we have the flood story, we have all sorts of marvelous things. And still, people don't know in a household way much about the culture or the writing or Mesopotamia or the Assyrians and the Babylonians. I don't know why it is. I used to think it was because Egypt, which is cinematographic, Hollywood, sexy, colourful,
Mm,
appeals to the animal in all of us sort of stuff, outshone us all the time. And everybody knows about mummies because they're so interesting, and
yeah.
amulets, and all the kids in the world know about mummies, and so it fills up their whole knowledge of the ancient world. But I know from experience in the BM and elsewhere that if you put a cuneiform tablet on the screen at the beginning of a lecture without much explanation and say this is a bit of writing, people make skeptical noises and
Mm,
shift about in their chairs, and then you explain exactly actually how it works. Now we can read it, and it's written by a human being 5,000 years ago, and this is one kind of thing. But we have love poetry, and we have philosophical anguish, and we have black magic, and red magic, and we have it all the things that writing are. We have all these things, and we have all these windows on all these people, and they were clever buggers, the ones who were written there, the astronomy and mathematics and medicine. They weren't just twerps. They really understood. They learned, they thought, they had imaginations, they made understanding. They're no different from us. No different from us.
absolutely. Can I ask you about your dream discovery? And I know we talked, and whether or not that would be in a skip or would it be in the heart of Iraq?
My dream discovery, you mean I haven't yet made?
Yes.
I could get into trouble with this. I've made quite a lot of dream discoveries. I mean, really quite remarkable things. I suppose we could play with the theoretical idea, because at the end of the cuneiform writing period, which is first century AD, there were still scholars who could read and write. They spoke Aramaic at home, but they still knew the Babylonian language. They still wrote tablets. There was a sort of university that lingered on and lingered on. And like universities in Britain, there were no more students, no more professors, and it all shut down. But there was a time in the first century where there were still people who wrote what we call chronicles.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to get into trouble with this, I hope. You can excise it. But you did ask me.
I
So
did.
this is the thing. The chronicles are very sophisticated works when they summarize affairs in the heavens, the position of things in the heavens, the height of the river, and by date, month, and year of a king's reign, they record important things. So the death of Alexander the Great is recorded in one of these things in 323,
Mm-hmm.
which is a pretty serious thing. Got onto a tablet in one of these chronicles. They were the official record of everything, and if they were all complete, we know a lot more. But it's conceivable, for example, that somebody might have recorded Jesus, because
Yeah,
Jesus caused a lot of trouble.
he did.
He did. He remember he came to a sticky end, I think is the
He was
technical term.
a very naughty boy.
Yes, but the thing is, we have chronicles of an earlier period where religious leaders who led people on marches and confronted the Senate, so to speak, in Babylon, and in the end were put to death 2 centuries or so more earlier before Jesus. And there are 2 accounts in Chronicles of, and he was followed by 12 sailors. I mean, I never know what to make of this because it is 2 centuries before Jesus. But it is kind of
That's
weird. But the
fascinating.
thing is, that I'm not joking, this is true.
Mm.
But given that, it's perfectly possible that some other phenomenon would come to their attention and it will be written down, and this person did this and people followed him and there was outcries, and in the temple the priests were angry and then they nailed him up. But I wouldn't say I look for this every day, but it is theoretically possible, because the events which it caused such a rumpus that it might have even reached the Academy of the Old Men in Babylon,
Uh-huh.
and a report comes to them and they would have duly recorded it. But I repeat, if you don't think this is, if we can talk about this in the way that you ask me, I answer it in the same way. But you don't want people, oh my God, they found this, because
Yeah.
this is what people, perhaps you should scrap this question. But in
No,
fact,
well,
that is the answer.
I love the answer, and it just made me think of a bit of an obsessive with history podcasts, and quite often that we keep bumping up across the same thing of human storytelling and how historic figures were often aping, or the stories themselves were kind of retconned into everyone was trying to be Alexander the Great, kind of looking back. So the stories kind of ended up just telling themselves over and over and over again, either because historical figures were trying to emulate great historical figures from the past, or they wanted their stories told in the same way. So
Yes,
often you'll have a great battle which starts with someone falling off their horse.
yes.
It fits a certain archetype. It fits a certain which goes back a lot further. And do you think that could possibly apply to the story of Jesus and 12 disciples?
They don't call them disciples; they're fishermen, and
Oh,
um, and I don't know. I don't know. I'm nervous about what it implies,
mm-hmm.
but um, really, I got into enough trouble when I wrote the book about Noah's Ark, called about the Babylonian form of the flood story with the ark that the Babylonians built. And when it came out, I got beriled. What's the word? Defiled? No, what's berated berated rather seriously for undermining the Bible and criticizing God's work. And there was a coven of bishops in the southern states who said, one of them said that I should be tarred and feathered, and another one
What a
wrote,
very Christian response.
well, the other one was even more serious, that I
Ooh.
should be excommunicated. But I'm Jewish, and if you are Jewish, being excommunicated is not really a worrying thing. But that's what happened. And then eventually people came to terms with it. I never got attacked on the street, because the thing is, partly related to your question, that you have the question is, did the flood actually happen or not? This is one thing. But in Mesopotamian psychology, the flood is a very, very important principle, because they talk about life before the flood and after the flood, and because the subjection to the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, which can give life supplying water, can give no water at all, or can sweep everything away in a really freaky flood system, is the background in which that story was created and came to be. And it passed into the book of Genesis, where the story in its outline is very similar to the Babylonian one,
Yeah.
but crucially different, because in Mesopotamia, the gods decided to wipe out mankind because they made such a racket. And when the Jewish philosophers in Babylon encountered this story, they thought it was too good to leave out of their own accounts of their origins. But in their case, God decided to destroy man because of sin. So
Yeah.
they recycled a story in a new guise. And this is a human phenomenon in literature. And it's just as it's impossible to make up a detective plot that no one's ever thought of before.
Yeah.
Whatever you do, you can't do that. And everybody knows that. Then the skill is to disguise or to rework. But in principle, there's a finite number of things. And I think the flood story with 24 hours to go, tick, 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 you've got to get this boat done and all that and rescue. And like a lot of Hollywood films, the same principle. The clock ticks in the corner of the screen. It was a marvelously dramatic thing, and at the last minute, God relented, and man with the rainbow. But there's a rainbow in Babylonia also in this story.
Uh-huh.
See, so it's lock, stock, and barrel. It was transposed from its original position into the crucial part of the Old Testament in Hebrew, and then, of course, into Islam and Christianity. It became a leitmotif for the same reason, because it showed man's vulnerability to divine anger, and you have to be humble and you have to be good and all that. It suits all the teachers. But when it first came out, I thought I was going to be sued on copyright grounds by the office up there. We note that in your recent work you have something like that with tarring and feathering.
It's quite something. I'll bring it to a close. I'd love to, obviously, if we can have a conversation after, that would be fantastic. So I'll push end on the recording in a second after one
Sure.
last question. It's I did have written down something about if you had to place a £1 bet on whether or not ancient aliens had a part in civilization. I think I'll leave that one to one side. I think I'll end with this, if you don't mind. How often do you get asked if you're a wizard?
Well, I once a journalist in the Guardian described me as a wizard. She was a proper journalist. She used to write lots of things. What was her name? I'll come back to me in a minute. She's marvelous, and she once described me as a wizard, which I was very pleased with. People don't ask me to my face, but I've done quite a lot of things on YouTube, and the word wizard does occur. I don't scrutinize these things. When they first started, I read them quite often, but I don't anymore. But now and again, I have a look. And a disconcerting number of these people say they would like me as their grandfather. That
Yeah.
annoys the hell out of me. I just cannot stand it. It's like if you're on the bus and going home and it's tiring and a young woman stands up to offer me the seat. I will never sit down if a woman I just cannot. My father brought me up. That's how I couldn't do it. And this thing about grandfather,
well, I mean, you did mention Sir David Attenborough earlier, so I mean, as bad as you get it, I guarantee you he gets it 100 times worse.
I'm sure he does. Well, I hope he just goes on and on forever and ever and ever. He's marvelous. I met him lots of times because he was a trustee, and he came to the museum, and when I wrote the art before Noah, I dedicated it to him. I've never done this before, but I wrote and asked him, and I dedicated it to Sir David Attenborough, our own Noah. And I think with the passage of time, that's become even more appropriate than it was then. But he would be my advocate for the award of the Globe.
It will be a sad day when he.
I don't bear to think
passes on to the next place. But again, you have to be grateful for the things you have now, don't you?
And in his case, absolutely. But the thing about him, apart from that, is he is a human being, the good of whose existence will outlast him, and what he did and what he taught and the people he's influenced, and it's an amazing thing, a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Well, to end it on I think you and I have an affinity for Terry Pratchett, and I think the GNU, that a man's name is never forgotten. No, a man's ripples in the pond of life continue as long as his name is spoken. I believe in that, and I love that.
I believe in that too. I think that's a very fine words to live by. In fact, I go so far as to say it might even go down on a T-shirt.
Yes, we make some money.
Novel scheme. Good idea. All right.
Dr. Finkel, thank you so much for your time. It's been
it's been a pleasure. I think you should call me Irving, since we've gone through this ring of fire together. So from now on, we have to be Irving and Mike. Brilliant.
Irving.
All right.
Thank you very much.
It's a big pleasure.